You're listening to Upstream by Integra, conversations on the future of scholarly and education publishing. This series brings together senior leaders to explore how publishing is evolving, from workflows to systems, from processes to infrastructure, and from scale to responsibility. The future of publishing isn't built downstream, it's designed upstream. Hosted by Ashutosh Ghildiyal.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Upstream by Integra, where we explore the ideas, innovations, and leadership shaping the future of scholarly and education publishing. Artificial intelligence is transforming research and publishing. Much of the conversation today focuses on productivity, from faster workflows and smarter discovery to greater efficiency. But what if we are asking the wrong questions? In this episode, I'm joined by Dominique de Roo, Chief Strategy Officer at the Gruyter Brill. Together, we explore why large language models are designed for fluency rather than truth, what that means for the scientific record, and why publishers have a responsibility that goes far beyond disseminating research. As AI becomes a primary gateway to knowledge, how do we preserve trust, protect scientific integrity, and keep human judgment at the heart of scholarship? We also discuss why publishers must engage not only with researchers, libraries, and institutions, but increasingly with big tech to help shape how future AI systems learn from, prioritize, and communicate scientific knowledge. I hope you enjoy this thought-provoking conversation with Dominique de Roo. So Dominique, I think it'll be a good idea if we start with the question on AI, because you have some thoughts there, and AI is something that is already transforming, and it's going to further transform our industry and how we operate. And I wanted to understand from you what your thoughts on AI are, specifically what is De Gruyter's strategy on AI, and what is the conversation, or what are the points that you would like to put forth for the industry to have a conversation about for our collective future?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. I think, I agree with you. This is the key topic, right, that we're all talking about. A couple of years ago, it was open access. Now it's all AI, and it's transforming not just our industry, but every industry. And I think there are a lot of conversations happening already on how it transforms how we work operationally. Of course, also there are discussions about products, but I think what I would like to talk about is going back more to the foundation of AI, and especially LLMs and how they have been built, because I think that really touches upon a core fundament of science, which is, of course, our industry. So what I think is a key problem, or perhaps the key problem with LLMs as they are right now, is that they have been built to sound right, but not to be right. I don't know how much you know about how LLMs work, but it basically predicts what would be the most logical next word, right? This is very much a simplification of how it works, but that is the foundation of the training level that they have. That is very problematic, I think, because it is not being trained to be correct, in the sense that science has a scientific method where we say, okay, we have a peer review system, we validate the knowledge that we publish, we have a retraction system, we have a replication model. So we have all of these core foundational mechanisms in place that we use to come to correct information. And that is not the case in the big AI models, whether it's Claude or Gemini, as they are right now, at least not on the training level. And I think I think that problem is recognized. I mean, a lot of people have talked about hallucinations, and there's been discussions on how to address that. I think big tech is also looking at addressing that, because it has gotten better. I think there are fewer hallucinations than there were in the very beginning. But I think it's very much being talked about in the sense of looking at the inference level or at the representation level. So we are talking about, can we have an additional layer after the training of the model where we talk about provenance, or about how to find the correct citation, or how to show the right source. But we're not really talking about that training level, the level that we don't really see, because that is such a black box that big tech is really not very transparent about. But that is really the foundation of the model. If wrong information goes into that training level, then it will come out at the other end. And I think that is a big issue, of course, if you're using it on a scientific level, as we see that scholars are doing that globally, that has had a massive uptake, but also just from a societal perspective. Everyone is using this for everything, right? I mean, people get medical information and they ask an AI about it, or they have a legal issue and they want more knowledge from an AI. So that is an absolute core issue where I think we don't talk about this enough at all. So that is one of my main concerns where I think this is an area that we need to address, and it's our role as publishers to address this.
Yeah. So what I hear from you is that AI is an efficient data processor, but it does not necessarily have an inbuilt need to be right or correct. It reproduces from existing sources based on the context given to it, based on how it is trained, and we don't know much about how it is trained or what is going into that training, what kind of data they are using, and we have no control over that. That is having downstream impacts on not only scientific publishing but also on society. So
exactly,
I would like to ask you, in that context, what is the responsibility that publishers have, and how do they adapt to that reality while keeping the business needs or the commercial needs in mind?
I think if you look at the role of publishers, it has always been twofold, right? On the one hand, of course, it is about the dissemination of knowledge, and that has changed very much over the past decades, also with something like Google. So that is one side of it, dissemination of knowledge, and of course AI is impacting that. But there's also being able to trust knowledge, so protecting the scientific method and protecting that entire architecture, those mechanisms of peer review and retraction.
Right.
Being able to validate knowledge, and that is another really core area of what we do. And I think that is the key aspect that we need to look at in terms of how we relate to AI.
Right. So what I hear from what you said is that it is useful to go back to the purpose of publishing. One of them is dissemination, to make sure that the science that is getting done is reaching the right audiences. And this is where now we are seeing a lot of mediation from AI happening, and it's going to happen, and increasingly more so as people use AI to find answers, search for new research, new discoveries, and so on. But the other side of that coin is that making sure that the information that they are getting or looking at is accurate, trustworthy, and reliable. And this is where publishers have a role to play. They have traditionally played this role, but now this role is more challenged because of the arrival of AI and what AI can do. Would you like to talk a little bit more about how this is also having an impact on the way knowledge is getting generated and created, more at the research and researcher end?
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is a conversation that the industry is also thinking about it. This is the reason why some publishers have said, as a scholar, you can't really trust an LLM, one of the big models to do your research. You have to come to our corpus, and they've built AI tools that are basically on a RAG foundation. So it is basically using that language expertise from the model, but saying to the model, you can only give an answer based on this corpus of academic content, which is our content, and that is academic, so you can trust it. That is part of the solution that we've been trying to offer in this sense, and I think that is an important one and a valuable one, but I think it's only part of the solution to the problem, because if, as we said, LLMs are being used in a much wider scale, I think there will always be a need for scholars to go to very specialized publishing platforms where you can get the most optimized research experience. So in that sense, these models where you have a RAG based on an academic corpus are very, very valuable. But we also see it being used, LLMs being used in a much wider scale by researchers, but also by society at large. And you're not really addressing that part of the problem. And I do feel that as publishers who are really the custodians of scientific knowledge, that is really part of our role to make sure that also in this area, we have basically a rule set and a mechanism where we drive the correctness of knowledge. And if we find that it is not correct, that we can address that. And that is not part of the conversation at all. that is something that is being neglected.
Right. So, like you touched upon, publishers having the responsibility of making sure that the LLMs are disseminating the right knowledge, trusted knowledge. Do publishers also have a responsibility of, at the more upstream end, to control how researchers use LLMs for creating knowledge, generating knowledge, and perhaps training them on how to use LLMs in their research? Because that's an area I think where they need a lot of guidance. And though there's a lot of work being done on it, still there are no universal policies or standards or understanding that comes which researchers can go to when understanding how to use LLMs in their research work.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a responsibility of the industry as well, not just of publishers, but also, of course, of universities. And I do see that there are steps being made in this sense by individual publishers. I think we all have guidelines on how to use AI. What do we find acceptable in terms of using AI for your research? If you use it, be transparent about it. And I think if you look at those guidelines, they are very similar across publishers. They're not completely 100% the same. There is a step that we could still make in that, and that is also being discussed in bodies like STM. So I think that is something that we are already working on. I think certainly we as a publisher, the Gruyter Brill, has given a lot of webinars for authors around AI, but I think that is something that other publishers are also doing. So that conversation is happening. We also speak to other stakeholders, of course, especially librarians, where I think they also play a very large role in building academic skills and teaching scholars, but especially younger scholars, how to find knowledge and how to then reproduce that, and what are the right mechanisms for that. So I think that is a joint responsibility. I do see us picking that up. I'm not too pessimistic about that area. Where I think I'm much more worried and perhaps less optimistic is the area of actually talking to big tech, talking to the providers of these larger, of these big LLMs, and having a cooperation, really, not just from the point of view of this is a conversation we're already having, right? We're already providing our content. This is going into the models. We're licensing that out. We are talking about how do you make sure that you cite it in the presentation layer, that you can actually contribute to the original source. And there's still a long way to go there. But we're not really talking about the training phase. Now, how do they actually feed the model at that phase? Do they just say, okay, here is a bulk of content, basically the internet, and go ahead and look at it, and then you have a better understanding of language? Or is there already a sense of not all knowledge is equal? Knowledge is more important than other knowledge. And I don't think there is a system in place at the moment during the training phase to actually look at retractions or to really say, okay, this piece of knowledge was peer reviewed. It has a higher stake than another piece of knowledge. I also think that if you look at what is the objective of big tech, of course, it's twofold. On the one hand, if they have a long-term vision, they want the information to be reliable. And I think that is recognized, because otherwise they wouldn't put effort into reducing the number of hallucinations, for example. But at the other end, they also have a stake in engagement. And we've seen what that does on a variety of different levels, whether it's search engines or social media. And that is, of course, the opposite of what scientific knowledge and getting the correct information is all about. So there is a tension there. And I think that is really a role for us as an industry. It's not something that an individual publisher can do. I think we have to do that as a joint effort to really create that framework together with computer scientists, together with the people who are really on the developer end for the firms that are releasing these models. That is a conversation that needs a lot more focus.
Yeah, it's very interesting that big tech has become a stakeholder, a partner, more to say, in the process of research dissemination. Previously, publishers had to deal with researchers as stakeholders, institutions, funders, and now there's another stakeholder called big tech, because they are responsible and they have control over how people will be accessing knowledge and interacting with that knowledge, and what effect and impact that has on society, and how science gets done, how science creates advancements in the future. And a lot of that depends on how well now publishers also work with the big tech in the areas that you mentioned, in letting them know which research is important, how to communicate about that research, whether the research is trusted or not, what peer reviewed means, and so on. All of that, I think there's a lot that needs to be done with this new stakeholder in the ecosystem. And do you think the publishing industry as a whole is beginning to realize that and work towards it collectively, or mostly are individual publishers doing it by themselves?
I think there is an industry effort. I mean, I think STM especially is an industry body that is looking at this very actively. They've just released an overview of their position around AI, where they've actively asked for input. And I think that is a really good starting point. It addresses really crucial questions. And that can be a document that is also a conversation piece between these stakeholders, also towards the developers of LLMs. But what I found missing in that document as well is that it also very much looks at the inference level. So how can we cite the right source, for example, when a model comes back with an answer? It very much looks at the presentation phase and didn't really address this training phase. So I think, that is an area where as an industry, we also need to have more focus.
Yeah. And what do you think, or where will you think future areas of value will emerge for publishers? For example, on the dissemination role, we've already been seeing a lot happen in the last couple of decades with open access coming in and other types of transformations taking place, subscription models going down. So when that dissemination part, which used to probably go directly to libraries, institutions, through publishers were the main channel. Now there's AI, that's the main channel. So in terms of value creation, where do you see scholarly publishing create more value? In the dissemination space, in the trust space, or in the how research gets done space?
I don't think it's either or. I think we still have all of these roles. And of course, it has changed a lot already. This is not new due to AI. We could already see that, for example, when Google became really important for scholars, right? And we started to have a Google Scholar. And that was a new area compared to just reading the book that was printed by the publisher. So that's not new, and we've always worked with firms like Google to make that better. That has very much been an engagement of the industry. I think that will continue on many more levels. I mentioned that I think very specialized publisher platforms that have a RAG architecture that look at AI just on their own corpus, there is a place for that. I think it's important to build those, because there will always be a group of researchers that is doing very specialized research that needs unique qualities of a platform. If you look at the Gruyter Brill, we specialize heavily in the humanities and social sciences, building out in STM. But if you look at the sort of tools that we publish, we have primary sources, we have encyclopedias, we have text editions. They're very specialized and they require a completely different interface. And that is something we can offer. So there is a place for that, certainly. But that shouldn't be the only strategy. We should also look at, okay, if you look at all of the research that is being done, and you might start your research with a very simple scan where you like asking your preferred LLM, I'm now looking at this area, what are some of the new things that are happening, or find me some literature on this theme. It is also a phased approach. You might start with literature scanning and see, okay, this is interesting, it leads you to something else. I think there AI also has a really positive role in the sense that it creates new interdisciplinary connections that weren't so easy to find before. So there is really giving us something very positive. And it's up to publishers to not only be available on our own area, our own platforms, but in all of these areas to work with those, to be where the scholars are, basically. So be in every moment where the scholarly research is being done, and then make sure that our content is found and that it's also clear what the source of that content is.
Right. So there is value in the source and making sure that the source is correct and has integrity and can be trusted. And there's also a value in long form content from the perspective of learning and building judgment, which you can get answers, quick answers to questions using LLMs. But to get understanding, it will still be required to go through long form content, to read something, understand the context of something, to build judgment, to build a more holistic view of what the subject is. So what you're saying is that AI licensing and mediation will still exist. There we might have a lot of value to add, but we also have value to add on the other aspects, on making sure that the sources are correct, that the scholarly record is trustworthy and well maintained. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that our role has not become less relevant. I see our role as becoming even more relevant. And I think if you look at societal developments over the past decades, we've had so many discussions around misinformation and how do we find the right sources. And AI is perhaps bringing a new dimension to that. But that is very much the role of publishers, to be that trustworthy source, to be able to say, this is knowledge you can trust because it has been validated. That becomes more crucial, not less crucial.
Right. And it does not mean that AI being the mediator in terms of searches, literature search, or any other kind of research support, that does not necessarily mean that there will be a distance from the publisher. What you're also suggesting is that the publisher should always be present with and close to the researchers and the research and where the research is being done. That is something that publishers will and should continue to do.
Yes, I think that is absolutely crucial. I also think that as a researcher, you have many different ways of how you go about your research. One moment you will be sitting in the library, reading an actual physical source. The other moment you are checking something quickly on your phone. And all of this can be true for the same researcher. I think it's very important that as publishers, we try to be where the researcher is, in as many areas as possible. So it's about integrating very much with researchers' tools and finding the right partnerships. I think that is absolutely crucial today.
One topic that frequently comes up in industry discussion is that of peer review and the challenges related to peer review. The scale of research is increasing, but the number of peer reviewers is not increasing. So there's a limited pool of people available to do peer review. And then that limitation or reviewer fatigue has downstream effects on delays related to publication, not being able to find reviewers, or sometimes it could also manifest in terms of the quality of reviews. And now we're also beginning to see a lot of concerns about the use of AI in peer review. And how do you see that? How do you see peer review in the context of increasing scale of the publishing industry, increasing number of submissions? We are seeing a lot of publishers see growth in terms of submissions as well as papers published. So how do you see that growth and peer review existing together?
I think this is indeed a very big issue for the industry. It's not also something that is not new. This existed before AI. We already had a problem, especially in some areas where there are only a few scholars that really know exactly what is going on, and they have to review all the content that is available. Of course, AI scales that up, right? Because it becomes easier, not only for paper mills to provide completely fabricated materials that we have to filter out somehow, but also for scholars themselves. If it becomes easier, and there is a legitimate way of using AI to do research, and I think all publishers are saying that we also encourage that. It's not the case that we say you can't use AI. You can use AI in a responsible way, and I think nowadays you would expect people to do that. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago where all of the major publishers were, and it was about how researchers are using AI and what our guidelines should be around peer review was one of the things that came up. And one thing that all of them said was, of course, we scan for AI generated materials. And a couple of years ago, you would have a couple of things that were flagged and you could filter that out and look at, is this something that we need to discard, or is that something that we need to improve? Nowadays, almost 100% of the papers have been touched by AI in some form. It is also a tool that researchers use to be able to do more. They're pressed for time. That is one of the biggest problems for researchers, for scholars. We're asking a lot. We're asking them to teach. We're asking them to publish. There is a lot of pressure on publishing more and more. It becomes a tool where you can be quicker in doing your analysis, in finding the right information. And that also has a productivity impact. That also grows the number of papers that we get in. So we need to find an answer to that. And I think on the one hand, of course, we have a lot of automated tools that look at very specific red flags where we see, hey, there is something going on in this image that can't be correct. That's a red flag. We have to filter it out. And there are some areas where we can really see the impact of paper mills, but it's a continuously evolving landscape. So we're continuously almost fighting a technology battle with the paper mill factories. We provide a new tool and they come up with a way around it. So this is very much a core issue, and there is a limited pool of human peer reviewers that can look at this content. But at the same time, I think having that human peer review is absolutely crucial. And that is also a core part of our strategy, that you have to have that human validation. And we can and we should look at all the possible ways that we can make it easier, that we can provide tools to make it more efficient. But in the end, you can't get around that human. That is something that needs to stay. So certainly that is still an ongoing issue to which there are no easy answers.
Right. So peer review is important. Human involvement in peer review in terms of reviewers using their judgment, expertise is important. That's a process that makes the science even stronger. And just recently, I think last couple of days, there's this paper going on circulating, which talks about how the peer review process, if it's more challenging and demanding, it can lead to more citations. And so that in itself, I think, talks about the value of peer review. And what I hear you saying is that tools should be used by peer reviewers as well as researchers to increase their productivity while maintaining the human judgment that is necessary. And perhaps, do you think that publishers also have some kind of a say, or they should have a say in how these tools are used, or training researchers on how to be more productive using their tools? Because like you said, a researcher has to play so many roles, they have to do so many things, they are always pressed for time, and one of the answers could be these tools. So would you like to talk a little bit about that, how publishers should play a role in training researchers on how to use AI to become more productive? And are there any such tools that Gruyter is developing or offering or planning to develop?
Yeah, so I do think that we publish guidelines around how to use AI, and this should be part of those guidelines. And that we provide a lot of webinars and trainings for authors. We publish them on our blog. We try to make that as available, and we try to disseminate that as widely as possible. Of course, this is also a conversation happening with publishers who are talking to their editorial boards. It's also very much a personal conversation where they give input and feedback around that. It's also not something that is just a responsibility of the publishing industry, very much something that universities should have a policy on, and that university libraries in general, research libraries have a role to play there. We touched upon that already. I think that is very much a joint effort. But I do think that is important that we say, okay, these are tools that you can use, and this is how we feel that it's a responsible way of using them. And we are also looking at areas like this. We are part of the STM, of course. STM is trying to bring different publishers together, looking at how do we do research integrity checks, for example. How do we automate some of these checks and balances and make that available for a wide number of publishers. In some cases, it is something that one publisher has created and offers to this toolbox. So that is really a combination of different tools that can be used by publishers, and we're following that very closely and are part of that.
Yeah, one of the questions that is on many people's minds is how these changes will further impact the smaller independent publishers or societies who do not have the same level of scale or size or resources of bigger publishers. Is there anything you would like to say to them? Are there any advice that you would like to give? Any thoughts on how they could, the great work that they are doing in the coming transformation?
Yes, I think you can really see over the past decades that it has become so much harder for smaller publishers to be able to keep that competition level now that technology has become so important, and you have to have a platform that offers all of these functionalities, there is more and more pressure on the types of things that you have to be able to provide, and it all costs money. And of course, the economy of scale plays a very big factor there. And we've also seen that there is there were many smaller publishers that weren't able to keep that up. And that's where we have seen a lot of consolidation in the industry. And the Gruyter Brill was no stranger to that. I mean, this is also one of the reasons why the Gruyter and Brill have merged, because we are stronger together and we have to have this level and this skill in order to keep competing and to keep being able to offer this technology at the level that is needed. If I look at smaller publishers, I think you can't do it on your own. Let's say you have to work together. And there are some ways that are available. We are trying to do that through our services arm called Paradigm. So that is a way that we offer our services, a wide range of them, to other publishers, so that we can work together, the skill that we have, and still be able to bring their content to their key stakeholders. So that is one way of doing it, and we're not the only one, of course. But I think every smaller publisher needs to find an answer to that. And I think no one can do it on their own. You need a certain skill in order to survive.
Yeah, that's. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Dominique. What I take away from what you said is two things. One is that smaller publishers and societies should leverage technology to scale themselves and to amplify who they are. And the second takeaway is that industry needs to work together. Smaller publishers need to work together in order to grow. I see some parts of it in some areas of the industry, but overall, like you mentioned, there's a lot that could be done there, and that is something that smaller publishers and societies should be pursuing more.
Yes, indeed.
So we've had a lot of questions and a very interesting in-depth discussion so far, and I wanted to ask you what your view on the industry is, because this is a question that seems to be on the back of mind of everyone, and everybody's trying to figure out things, because we are in a changing, transforming industry. We have been for, I think, long time. The publishing industry, scholarly publishing, especially last 2 decades, has been in a continuous state of transformation. Every decade, every 5 years, there's something new. And so I wanted to ask you, what's your outlook of the future for the industry? Do you think it is positive? Do you think it's challenging? Or do you think it's both?
Yes, so I would say that indeed it has been such a journey of transformation over the past decades. And what we've seen during that transformation is that we have been able to adapt. We have completely changed the way we work. And in the future, I see that need for transformation and that flexibility and that ability to adapt to changing circumstances, that will remain, and AI will play a very large role in that. But I'm also really optimistic, because if I look at the past, and we have always been able to do that, that's why we're still around. And I would say that our role, as we've discussed, is a very much a crucial role. In today's day and age, it is absolutely vital that we are able to provide the correct information, that we drive knowledge in a way that we can trust it, have a mechanism where we can say, this is an answer that I can rely on. And that has become much more crucial in all of this technological disruption than it ever was before. And that is a crucial part of our role. So in that sense, I'm very optimistic, but I think we have to grab that role.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of work to do in that sense.
Right. Great perspective, Dominique. And it is good to be optimistic. I think it's important to be optimistic. It's necessary to be optimistic, because if we are not optimistic, then we will not be in the driver's seat. We will not take charge of the direction we want to go in. We'll be helpless and letting things drive us. So optimism is definitely important and necessary. And other thing that you mentioned was, it's very important to recognize the value that we offer. And we do offer a lot of value. In this conversation, we've spoken about various areas where we can add value, and those areas will remain to continue. Society will always need science and research. They will always need the research to be trusted, trustworthy, and to reach them in the right way. And they will need help of publishers, so scholarly publishers, in doing that. And then the third aspect is something that we also discuss sometimes, is articulating your value in a way that reaches the other person, that reaches the other stakeholders. And that is also one of the discussions that we've been having in society is that publishers should be able to articulate their value better to funders, policymakers, and institutions on the role they play and the value they add. What goes behind publishing, the effort it takes, and the mindset of the industry, and the kind of work ethic the people have. It's a great industry. Everybody's so passionate about it. We have so many discussions. We want to learn, we want to do things in a better way, and that's very important for the industry, and that's what I take away from this conversation with you so far. Optimism is the way, and we have a positive future.
Yes, that sounds like an excellent conclusion.
Happy to do so.
No, I think that's fine. It was a really nice and interesting conversation. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. I'm really happy to have this conversation with you, Dominique. Thank you so much. Really honored that you joined us for this, and really looking forward to how everyone is going to react once this conversation comes out.
Likewise. Curious to see the reactions. So I'm sure we'll touch base on that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dominique. It was
Thanks
a pleasure
Have
having
a nice
you.
day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Upstream by Integra. If this conversation resonated, you can subscribe for future episodes.